cold doesn't just bite in Stalingrad. It crawls inside your bones and makes a home there, whispering that you'll never be warm again. I learned that in the winter of 1943, crouched in the skeletal remains of what was once an apartment building, watching steam rise from my breath like the ghosts of the 2 million souls this city had already swallowed. My name is Viktor Konstantin Volkov, though back in Brooklyn they just called me Vic. My parents fled the Bolsheviks in 1920, brought me to America when I was just 2 years old, raised me in a cramped tenement in Brighton Beach where Russian was spoken more than English. When Pearl Harbor happened, I enlisted like every other American kid. But unlike them, I spoke perfect Russian with a Moscow accent my mother had drilled into me. That skill, that accident of birth, is what brought me here, to the frozen hell where the Third Reich and the Soviet Union were tearing each other apart with a savagery the world had never seen. I wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. I was an observer, a liaison, a translator attached to the 62nd Soviet Army under General Chuikov. My job was to coordinate with American intelligence, to watch, to report, to survive. The Soviets didn't entirely trust me, an American with a Russian face, and the Americans back home didn't quite know what to do with me. I existed in a strange liminal space, belonging nowhere, observing everything. It was January 17, 1943. The temperature had dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. The city was no longer a city. It was a graveyard of concrete and steel. Every building a hollow skull, every street a frozen river of blood and debris. The fighting had been going on for 5 months, and what had once been street-to-street combat had devolved into something more primal. Room to room, floor to floor, sometimes inch-by-inch struggles for territory that meant nothing except that you were still breathing. But there was another war happening in Stalingrad, quieter but no less deadly. A war of patience, precision, and psychological terror. The war of the snipers. I'd been embedded with a Soviet sniper unit for 3 weeks by that point. Not by choice. I'd been reassigned after my previous post was obliterated by a German bombing raid that killed 17 men and left me with a ringing in my ears that still hasn't completely faded. Even now, 70 years later, the sniper unit was led by a man named Dmitry Petrov, a former schoolteacher from Siberia, who had discovered he possessed an almost supernatural ability to remain still for hours and kill men from distances that seemed impossible. Dmitry didn't talk much. None of them did. Snipers in Stalingrad developed a peculiar silence, as if words might give away their positions even when they were miles from the front. They moved like shadows, thought like chess players, and killed with a cold efficiency that was both terrifying and mesmerizing to witness. But there was one German sniper who had become an obsession for our unit. We called him Der Schatten, the Shadow, though we didn't know his real name. For 6 weeks he had been operating in the factory district, in the ruins of the Barricadi ordnance factory and the tractor factory that had become the most contested real estate on Earth. 17 confirmed Soviet officer kills, including 2 of our best snipers. He never missed. He never revealed his position, and he was driving our commanders insane. The psychological impact of a skilled sniper is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. It's not like artillery or machine gun fire, which is random, chaotic, survivable through luck and quick thinking. A sniper's bullet is personal, it's chosen. Somewhere out there, hidden in the rubble, a human being is watching you through a scope, calculating wind and distance, waiting for the perfect moment to erase your existence with a single squeeze of a trigger. You can't hear it coming. 1 second you're alive, talking, thinking, and the next second nothing. Your comrades find you with a neat hole in your head, and they know. The shadow is still out there. Men began to move differently in the factory district. They hunched, they sprinted between cover, they stopped congregating in groups. Officers removed their insignia. Everyone became paranoid, seeing death in every broken window, every pile of rubble, every shadow. That's what Der Schatten wanted. Fear is a weapon more powerful than any bullet. Dmitry became obsessed with finding him. I watched him spend hours studying maps, analyzing kill sites, trying to determine patterns. Soviet command had brought in their best snipers, including the famous Vasily Zaitsev, to hunt this ghost. But Der Schatten was smart. He never used the same position twice. He never fell into predictable patterns. He was a phantom, and phantoms don't die easily. On the morning of January 17th, Dmitry woke me before dawn. His face was gaunt, hollow-eyed from lack of sleep, but there was something electric in his gaze. Through chattering teeth, We slept in an underground maintenance tunnel where the temperature was barely warmer than outside. He told me he thought he'd figured it out. Der Schatten had made a mistake, killed an officer from an angle that revealed his general operating area. Dmitri believed he'd narrowed the German sniper's hide to a 3-building radius in the northern section of the tractor factory. I didn't want to go. God, I didn't want to go. I was a translator, not a combat soldier, and certainly not a sniper hunter. But Dmitri insisted he needed me. If we captured Der Schatten alive, and that was always the preference to extract intelligence, I would need to interrogate him, to translate. The Soviets had interrogators, brutal men from NKVD who made prisoners talk through methods I'd rather not describe, but Dmitri wanted someone who could communicate immediately in the field. So I went. We moved out at dawn, a small team. Dmitri, myself, and 2 other snipers named Alexei and Yuri. We traveled light, rifles, ammunition, water bottles that would freeze within hours, and a few pieces of dried bread that were harder than the rubble we crawled over. The city was eerily quiet that morning. The artillery bombardments hadn't started yet, and in that pre-dawn stillness, Stalingrad felt like a frozen snapshot of the apocalypse. The tractor factory was 3 kilometers away. We covered the distance in almost 4 hours, moving slowly, methodically, using every scrap of cover. You learn quickly in Stalingrad that speed kills. A dash across open ground, a moment of impatience, that's all it takes. We saw evidence of that lesson everywhere. Frozen bodies half buried in snow, some German, some Soviet, some so mangled you couldn't tell which side they'd fought for. We reached the factory complex around 10 in the morning. The sun was a pale disk behind perpetual clouds of smoke that hung over the city like a funeral shroud. The factory had been beautiful once, I imagined. A monument to Soviet industrial might, producing tractors that would feed the nation. Now it was a twisted maze of collapsed walls, exposed rebar, and machinery torn apart by months of artillery fire. Dmitri signaled for us to stop in the hollow shell of what had been an administrative building. He spread out a hand-drawn map on the frozen floor and pointed to 3 buildings, each about 200 meters apart, forming a triangle. Somewhere in that triangle, he believed, Der Schatten had his primary hide. The plan was simple, which in war usually means it's the most dangerous kind. We would split up. Dmitri would take the eastern position, Alexei and Yuri would approach from the south, and I would accompany Dmitri to observe and translate if needed. We would watch, wait, and if Der Schatten revealed himself, either by taking a shot or by movement, we would coordinate to eliminate or capture him. I remember asking Dmitri what made him so certain Der Schatten was still here, that he hadn't moved after his last kill. Dmitri looked at me with those 1,000-yard eyes that all the snipers had and said something I'll never forget. A sniper's position is like a home. You don't leave home unless you have to. He's comfortable here. Comfortable men make mistakes. We took our positions around noon. Dmitri chose a spot on the 3rd floor of a partially collapsed workshop, where fallen beams created a natural hide with excellent sightlines to all 3 buildings Der Schatten might be using. I positioned myself slightly behind him, trying to make myself as small as possible, which wasn't difficult. Fear is an excellent motivator for minimizing your profile. Then we waited. People who've never hunted don't understand what waiting really means. It's not like waiting for a bus or waiting in line. It's a complete surrender of time, a meditation where seconds become hours and hours become eternities. You can't move. You can't scratch an itch. You can't shift your weight when your legs cramp. You become part of the environment, and any deviation from absolute stillness could mean death, yours or your target's escape. Dmitri was a master of this. He could remain motionless for 6, 7, 8 hours, barely breathing, his eye pressed to his scope, his finger resting gently on the trigger guard. I tried to imitate him, but I wasn't built for it. My American impatience kept bubbling up. I wanted to move, to speak, to do something, but I learned to suppress it, to channel it into hyper-awareness of my surroundings. The city occasionally erupted with violence around us. Distant explosions, the chatter of machine guns, the screams of men dying in ways I tried not to imagine. But in our little corner of hell there was only silence and cold and watching. It was around 3 in the afternoon when Dmitri stiffened slightly. The change was almost imperceptible. A slight tension in his shoulders, a subtle shift in his breathing. He'd seen something. I wanted to ask what, but I knew better. Instead, I followed his gaze through my binoculars, scanning the 3 target buildings. At first I saw nothing. Just ruins, shadows, the endless gray-brown wasteland of destroyed architecture. But then, in the middle building, on what might have been the fourth floor, I caught it, the briefest flash of movement. A shadow that was slightly darker than the other shadows, that moved with purpose rather than random chance. Dmitri whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear him. There. Window. Fourth floor. He's adjusting position. My heart hammered against my ribs. After all the stories, all the dead men, Der Schatten was real. He was right there, maybe 250 meters away, and he had no idea we'd found him. What happened next unfolded over the course of 4 hours, but in my memory, it exists as a single, prolonged moment of tension so intense I thought my heart might simply stop from the strain. Dmitri didn't shoot. Not yet. He explained in the barest whisper that he needed a clear shot, and more importantly, he wanted to understand Der Schatten's routine, his patterns, his vulnerabilities. Shooting too soon might mean a miss, and a miss meant Der Schatten would disappear, potentially forever. So we watched as the German sniper, we couldn't see him clearly, just hints of movement, the occasional glimpse of fabric or the matte black of a rifle barrel, went about his deadly business. Around 4 o'clock, we heard a single rifle shot from his position, and minutes later, Alexei radioed in a coded message, Soviet lieutenant killed, 130 meters from our southern position. Der Schatten was hunting. Dmitri's jaw clenched. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The German was comfortable, confident. He'd just taken another life and felt secure enough in his position to remain there. That confidence would be his downfall. As the afternoon wore into evening, the temperature plummeted further. My fingers were numb despite my gloves. My feet had lost all feeling hours ago. Dmitri seemed immune to it, a human statue carved from ice and determination. Then, just as the winter sun began its early descent, painting the ruins in shades of gray and darker gray, Der Schatten made his mistake. He moved to a new position within the building, closer to a window that offered a better angle on Soviet positions to the south. For perhaps 3 seconds he was partially exposed. Not his body, but enough of his outline that Dmitri had a shot. But Dmitri didn't take it. Instead, he did something I didn't expect. He deliberately kicked a piece of rubble near our position, creating a small scraping sound that echoed in the frozen silence. Der Schatten froze. Even from that distance, I could sense his sudden alertness, the way a predator senses another predator. He knew instantly that he was being hunted. What followed was the most intense psychological chess match I've ever witnessed. Dmitri had announced his presence deliberately, transforming the hunt from a one-sided ambush into a duel. It was arrogant, maybe even insane, but I understood the calculation. A panicked sniper makes more mistakes than a comfortable one. For the next hour, neither man moved. They were locked in a stalemate of wills, each trying to outlast the other's patience, each trying to force the other into a revealing movement. The only sounds were distant artillery and my own careful breathing, which I tried to keep silent and steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. Darkness began to fall. In winter Stalingrad, full night came early, around 5:30 or 6. Dmitri whispered that Der Schatten would have to make a decision soon, stay in a compromised position overnight, where he could be flanked and killed, or attempt to escape under cover of darkness. At 5:47 p.m. by my watch, Der Schatten made his move. He broke from his position not toward escape but toward us. It was an aggressive, almost reckless maneuver. Instead of retreating, he was trying to close the distance to turn the tables and eliminate the threat to his domain. Dmitri saw him immediately. The German was moving through the rubble between buildings, using cover expertly, but he was moving, and movement is vulnerability. Dmitri tracked him through his scope, his breathing steady, his finger moving to the trigger, but he didn't shoot. I couldn't understand why. We had him. The shot was difficult but possible. Why was Dmitri waiting? Then I understood. Dmitri wasn't trying to kill him. He was hurting him. With minute adjustments to his rifle's aim, tracking the German's movement, Dmitri was subtly forcing Der Schatten into a killing zone where Alexei and Yuri had positioned themselves. It was brilliant and terrifying. Dmitri was conducting an orchestra of death, coordinating 3 rifles to corner a man who had killed with impunity for 6 weeks. Der Schatten was approximately 50 meters from our position when I think he finally understood the trap. He stopped behind a concrete pillar, and I could almost feel his mind racing, calculating angles, distances, odds of survival. He was boxed in, Dmitri ahead, Alexei and Yuri to his flanks, and open ground behind him that offered no cover. What happened next is the moment that has haunted me for 70 years. The image that appears in my dreams. The reason I wanted to tell this story. Der Schatten stood up. Not to fight, not to run. He stood up, slowly, deliberately, his hands rising above his head. His rifle, a beautiful Mauser Karabiner 98K with what looked like a Zeiss scope, hung from his shoulder untouched. His hands were empty, reaching toward the darkening sky. He was surrendering. I've tried to describe what his face looked like at that moment, but words always fail me. He was young, maybe 25, 30 at most. Blonde hair matted with dirt and sweat, hollow cheeks that spoke of months of inadequate rations. But it was his eyes that struck me. They were blue, pale blue like winter sky, and they were filled with something I hadn't expected to see in the deadliest sniper on the Eastern Front. Absolute, primal terror. Not the fear of death. Soldiers learned to manage that. This was something deeper, more existential. It was the fear of a predator who suddenly realizes he's become prey. The psychological collapse that comes when you've spent so long being the hunter that you've forgotten what it feels like to be hunted. His whole body was shaking. I could see it from 50 meters away. This man, who had killed 17 officers with cold precision, who had terrorized an entire section of the front line, who had seemed almost supernatural in his abilities, was trembling like a child caught in a nightmare. Dmitri stood slowly, his rifle trained on the German. I followed his lead, my frozen legs screaming as blood rushed back into them. Alexei and Yuri emerged from their positions, forming a triangle around Der Schatten, rifles raised, fingers on triggers. Dmitri called out in Russian, "Remove the rifle." Slowly. The German didn't understand the words, but he understood the intent. With shaking hands, he unbuckled the rifle strap and let the weapon fall to the ground. It clattered against frozen concrete, the sound echoing through the ruins. I stepped forward, my throat dry, and spoke in German. "We are not going to kill you. Put your hands behind your head and walk toward us, slowly." He looked at me, and I saw recognition flash across his face. Surprised that an American voice was speaking German in a Soviet uniform. He complied, walking toward us with the careful, measured steps of a man walking through a minefield. As he got closer, I could see more details. His Wehrmacht uniform was filthy, patched in multiple places. His hands, when I could see them, were scarred and calloused. But it was his eyes that I couldn't stop looking at. Those pale blue eyes that held depths of fear I hadn't thought possible. Dmitri patted him down roughly, searching for weapons. He found a pistol, a knife, and several additional magazines. No papers, no identification, nothing that would reveal who this man was beyond a serial number stamped on a dog tag. I asked him in German, "What is your name?" He didn't answer immediately. His jaw worked silently, and I wondered if he'd forgotten how to speak. Finally, in a hoarse voice, "Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, 24th Panzer Division, attached sniper unit. How long have you been here? In this position?" 6 weeks, maybe 7. I've lost track of days." His voice was hollow, mechanical. He wasn't seeing us, not really. His eyes were focused on some middle distance, seeing ghosts perhaps, or his own imminent death. Dmitri spoke, and I translated. "He wants to know how many you've killed." Weber laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Does it matter?" "Enough. Not enough. Too many. I don't know anymore." 17 officers, I said. "That's what our count shows." 17 officers, Weber repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "And how many soldiers? How many men who weren't officers, who were just trying to survive, who I killed because they were there, because they were the enemy, because that's what I was trained to do?" He looked directly at me, and the intensity of his gaze made me step back. "Do you want to know the truth, American? I've stopped counting. After the first 20, maybe 30, they stopped being people. They were just targets, problems to solve, wind calculations and distance adjustments." There was something profoundly broken in his confession, a dissociation that I recognized from other soldiers I'd interviewed, men who had killed so many times that the act of killing had become divorced from any human emotion. But then he said something that changed everything. "Until 3 days ago." "What happened 3 days ago?" I asked. Weber's face contorted, and for a moment I thought he might cry. "I killed a Soviet officer. Young, maybe 19, 20. He was standing in an open window, smoking a cigarette, reading a letter. I could see him so clearly through my scope. He was smiling. Whatever he was reading made him smile. And I took the shot. Perfect shot. Center mass. He was dead before the cigarette hit the ground. He paused, his breathing ragged, but I saw his face. For the first time in months, I really saw the face of someone I killed. I saw his smile disappear. I saw the confusion in his eyes before they went empty. And I realized he was a person. They were all people, every single one of them. And I've been murdering them. The cold seemed to intensify around us. Even Dmitri, who didn't understand German, seemed affected by the raw emotion in Weber's voice. That's when I knew I couldn't do it anymore. Weber continued. I tried to leave this position. I packed my gear twice. But where would I go? Back to my unit? To kill more? To pretend I'm still a soldier instead of a murderer? Forward into Soviet territory? To be killed or captured? I was trapped. Frozen here by fear and guilt and the absolute certainty that there's no redemption for what I've become. I translated for Dmitri, watching his face carefully. The Russian sniper's expression was unreadable, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. He understood what Weber was describing because he'd felt it too. The moment when killing stops being a duty and becomes an unbearable burden. Dmitri spoke, and I translated his words back to German. He says many snipers reach that moment. Some push through it, some eat a bullet, some surrender. You chose surrender. He wants to know why. Weber looked at Dmitri, really looked at him, seeing perhaps for the first time that his captor was as much a victim of this war as he was. Because, he said slowly, I realized today that I wanted to survive. Not as a soldier, not as a sniper, not as Hauptmann Weber of the 24th Panzer, as a human being. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be human, and I knew the only way to do that was to stop killing. He gestured to the ruins around us, the frozen wasteland that had once been a thriving city. This place breaks everyone eventually. The city itself is a sniper, killing slowly, methodically, stripping away everything that makes you human until you're just another ghost haunting the rubble. I felt myself disappearing. I felt Friedrich dying and der Schatten taking over completely. So I waited for someone better than me to find me, to force me to make a choice. And you did. I stood there in the freezing darkness translating this confession and felt something shift in my understanding of war. Weber wasn't a monster. He was a skilled soldier who had been ground down by the mechanics of killing until he broke. But in breaking, he'd found something like redemption, the courage to stop. Dmitri made a decision then. He lowered his rifle and gestured for Alexei and Yuri to do the same. In Russian, he said something I'll never forget. A man who chooses to be human in hell is worth more than a man who learns to love it. We marched Weber back to Soviet lines as the night fully descended. The journey took 3 hours through frozen ruins and past checkpoints manned by suspicious guards who wanted to execute him on the spot. Dmitri intervened each time, explaining that Weber was his prisoner, that he would be interrogated for intelligence. But I think the real reason Dmitri protected him was more personal. He saw in Weber a possible future for himself, a warning of what happens when a sniper stays in the field too long, kills too many times, and loses the ability to see the enemy as human. Weber was sent to a POW camp. I never saw him again. I've tried over the years to find out what happened to him. Soviet records are fragmentary and unreliable, but I found hints. A prisoner transfer in March 1943, a name that might be his on a repatriation list from 1949. I want to believe he survived, that he made it home, that he found some measure of peace. Dmitri continued fighting until April 1943, when he was wounded by artillery shrapnel and evacuated to a field hospital. He lost his left eye but survived the war. We corresponded occasionally until his death in 1987. He never spoke directly about Weber, but in one letter he wrote, "We were all monsters in Stalingrad. Some of us just had the courage to stop being monsters before the war ended. As for me, I remained in Stalingrad until the German surrender on February 2, 1943. I witnessed the moment when Field Marshal Paulus surrendered with the remnants of the 6th Army, saw the columns of frozen, defeated men marching into captivity, men who looked like walking corpses, already dead, but not yet buried. I returned to America after the war, finished my degree at Columbia, became a professor of Eastern European history. I married, had children, lived a good life, but Stalingrad never left me. The cold is still in my bones. The memories are still vivid, even as other details of my life fade with age. I'm 92 years old now. writing this in the spring of 2012, knowing I don't have much time left. My hands shake. Parkinson's, the doctors tell me, and my memory for recent events is unreliable at best. But I remember January 17th, 1943, with perfect clarity. I remember Weber's face, his pale blue eyes, the trembling in his hands. People often ask me what I learned from the war, what wisdom I can impart from having witnessed one of history's bloodiest battles. The answer is complicated, but it centers on that moment when Weber surrendered. I learned that even the deadliest among us can fear, that the capacity for violence doesn't exclude the capacity for humanity, that breaking, truly breaking and admitting you've broken, takes more courage than continuing to kill. That war doesn't have heroes and villains in the way we want it to. It has human beings ground down by impossible circumstances, making choices that range from heroic to monstrous, often in the same breath. Weber taught me that surrendering isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing a soldier can do. He chose to stop being a weapon and start being a man again, even knowing it might mean his death, even knowing his own army would consider him a coward or traitor, even knowing he'd carry the guilt of those 17 kills, and all the uncounted others, for the rest of his life. I think about him often, especially now as I approach my own end. I wonder if he found peace. I wonder if he ever forgave himself. I wonder if, somewhere in Germany, there's an old man who sometimes thinks about the frozen day in Stalingrad, when he chose humanity over the rifle. The world remembers Stalingrad for its statistics, 2 million casualties, a turning point in the war, the place where the German advance finally broke against Soviet determination and winter cold. But I remember it for a different reason. I remember it as the place where I learned that war's greatest casualty isn't lives. It's the piece of our humanity we sacrifice every time we reduce another human being to a target. And I remember it as the place where I witnessed a man reclaim that humanity, even in the coldest, darkest corner of hell on earth. Dmitri was right. A man who chooses to be human in hell is worth more than a man who learns to love it. That's the lesson of Hauptmann Friedrich Weber, the deadliest sniper I ever met, who taught me that even those who deal in death can still choose life. That's the lesson I carry with me. Even now, 70 years later, as winter approaches and I feel that old Stalingrad cold settling back into my bones one final time.